You know, when most people hear the word lust, they immediately think of something sexual. But what if I told you lust is far more subtle and far more dangerous than we often realize? Lust isn't just about physical desire, it's a craving, a deep longing for something outside of God's will. It hides in plain sight in places we don't expect. It's the silent pull that slowly tugs our hearts away from what truly matters. Let's go back to the very beginning, Genesis 3:6. Eve looked at the forbidden fruit. And yes, she saw it was good for food, but that wasn't the whole reason she reached for it. She wanted wisdom. She wanted more than what God had already provided. That's lust. It's not just about appetite. It's about a restless desire that says, what God gave me isn't enough. And friend, that's where the danger lies. Lust distorts our perception. It blinds us. We begin chasing things, pleasure, power, possessions, thinking this will satisfy us. But here's the truth. Nothing outside of God's purpose will ever truly fulfill your soul. So let me ask you, have you ever desired something so badly you ignored God's voice just to get it? We've all been there. But understanding lust for what it really is, that's the first step toward freedom. When we see it clearly, we can resist it powerfully. So stay with me because in the next part, we are going to break down 6 specific forms of lust that sneak into our lives, often without us even noticing. Let's be honest, who doesn't like a little recognition, a compliment, a pat on the back, a like on something we posted? We're wired to desire affirmation. But here's the truth: when that desire becomes a craving, it starts to control us. This is what the Bible warns us about in John 12:43. It says, they loved human praise more than the praise of God. Think about that. When the applause of people becomes more important than the approval of God, we've crossed a dangerous line. Today with social media, it's easier than ever to fall into this trap. We start measuring our worth by how many people comment on our photos or watch our videos. And little by little, we lose touch with who we really are, beloved children of God, already chosen, already enough. I've been there too. I've posted something not because I believed in it, but because I knew it would get attention. And the more I chased likes, the emptier I felt. You see, when we build our identity on the shifting sands of public approval, we're never secure. So let me ask you, whose praise are you really living for? Because when you seek God's approval first, everything else falls into place. His love doesn't come with conditions or hashtags. It's steady, eternal, and deeply fulfilling. Don't trade your purpose for popularity. The applause of heaven is worth more than the loudest crowd. Have you ever walked into a room and felt that urge to prove you belong at the top? Maybe you've thought, if I can just get that title, that promotion, that recognition, then I'll matter. That's what the lust for status does. It whispers lies. It tells us that our value depends on how high we rank compared to others. And before we know it, we start climbing ladders God never asked us to climb. We begin to look down on people who don't measure up, and slowly pride creeps in. We judge, we compete, we distance ourselves, all to protect this fragile image of superiority. But here's the truth: the higher you try to lift yourself, the more you risk a hard fall. Luke 14:11 puts it plainly: those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. God's kingdom works upside down from the world's standards. While the world applauds power and prestige, Jesus honors humility. You don't need a title to have worth. You don't need status to serve with purpose. God sees you, not your resume, not your rank, but your heart. So here's the challenge. What if we stopped striving to be impressive and started aiming to be faithful? Because in the eyes of God, the humble are already standing tall. Let me ask you something. How much money would be enough to finally make you feel secure? It's a question many of us never stop to answer because we're too busy chasing more. More money, more stuff, more comfort. And the world tells us that's what success looks like. But here's the warning: when wealth becomes our purpose, our identity starts to slip away. 1 Timothy 6:9 gives it to us straight. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. That's not a metaphor. It's a reality. We've seen marriages collapse, families fall apart, integrity traded, all for the promise of just a little bit more. Now, don't get me wrong. Money isn't evil. It's a tool. But when it becomes your master, that's when trouble begins. I've known people with very little who live in deep peace and others with six figures in the bank who can't sleep at night. Because peace doesn't come from a number. It comes from knowing who you are and, more importantly, whose you are. So here's a challenge. What are you trusting in for your future, your bank account, or your provider? Because wealth can give you comfort, but only God can give you security that lasts. We live in a world that screams, be whoever you want. Do whatever feels right. No one can tell you otherwise. And on the surface, that sounds like freedom, right? But let me ask you, is it really there's a subtle lie hiding behind that kind of thinking? It tells us that freedom means zero limits. That being truly free means throwing off all boundaries, moral, spiritual, even relational ones. We start saying things like, I'm just being me, even when our choices are hurting others and ourselves. But 1 Peter 2:16 gives us a powerful reminder. Live as free people, but do not use your freedom as a cover-up for evil. Live as God's servants. Real freedom, lasting soul-deep freedom, doesn't come from doing whatever we want. It comes from walking in truth. It comes from knowing we're not our own, but bought at a price by a loving God who sees the whole picture. You see, when we follow our own desires without restraint, we don't end up free, we end up enslaved. Enslaved to addiction, to pride, to isolation. But when we submit our will to God, we're no longer ruled by chaos. We're guided by peace. So here's the real question. Are you chasing freedom that feels good in the moment, or the kind that sets your soul free forever? Because the truth is, the most liberating thing you can do is to surrender. Let me ask you something real. Have you ever felt like you're constantly chasing the next high? Maybe not drugs or parties, but that next vacation, that next experience, that next little hit of happiness, only to feel empty when it's over. See, the desire to enjoy life isn't wrong. God created beauty, joy, even celebration. But the problem begins when pleasure becomes the point of our lives, when we start living for the next thrill rather than for God. Proverbs 21:17 says, whoever loves pleasure will become poor. Whoever loves wine and oil will never be rich. And this isn't just about money. It's about the poverty of the soul that comes when pleasure is all we pursue. I've watched people throw away marriages, careers, and peace of mind just for a few moments of escape. Addiction doesn't always look like a bottle. Sometimes it looks like constantly scrolling, always planning the next indulgence, never able to just be. But here's the truth. Pleasure is a wonderful servant and a terrible master. God doesn't want to take joy from your life. He wants to anchor it in something deeper. In Him, pleasure becomes pure, purposeful, and lasting, not fleeting and destructive. So here's the challenge today. What are you truly craving, and is it leading you closer to peace or further from it? Because the only pleasure that satisfies the soul is the presence of God. Let's talk about something subtle but powerful, the desire to influence. Now, influence in itself isn't bad. In fact, we're called to be salt and light in the world. But here's the danger when the need to be heard becomes the need to control. Have you ever caught yourself thinking, if people would just do what I say, things would go better? I have. Sometimes it hides behind good intentions. We say we're just trying to help or being a strong leader. But underneath, there's this craving to have the final word, to be the one everyone listens to. Romans 12:3 reminds us, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment. In other words, check your heart. True influence doesn't come from dominance, it flows from humility. Jesus, the most influential person in history, washed feet. He led by serving, not by forcing. That's the kind of influence that transforms lives. So ask yourself today, are you trying to build people up or bend them to your will? Because when influence becomes about ego instead of love, we've missed the point. Real impact happens not when we demand attention, but when we reflect God's character in quiet, faithful ways. Influence that lasts begins with a servant's heart. Let's talk about something that doesn't look like a problem at first knowledge. In fact, most of us were raised to pursue it right. Read more, learn more, stay informed. And that's a good thing. But here's the danger when our thirst for knowledge becomes a way to feel superior. We've crossed into pride. You see, there's a kind of knowledge that puffs us up instead of building others up. We start using what we know to win arguments, to prove we're smarter, to silently look down on those who don't think or speak like us. And the Bible speaks directly to this. In 1 Corinthians 8:1, it says, knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. That hits hard. Because what's the point of knowing everything if we forget how to love? I've had seasons where I thought if I just read one more book, listened to one more podcast, I'll be ahead. But I wasn't growing in wisdom, I was growing in ego. And honestly, it made me less teachable, less open to God's leading. Real wisdom doesn't come from knowing more facts. It comes from knowing God and walking humbly with Him. So let me ask you, are you learning to impress or are you learning to serve? Because the smartest people in God's kingdom are often the ones most willing to sit at His feet. Let's be real, most of us don't wake up in the morning saying, I want power. But the truth is, we often crave it in quiet, subtle ways. Maybe it's the urge to control the people around us, to always be right, to have the final say in every conversation or the upper hand in every relationship. We convince ourselves it's leadership or just being responsible. But deep down, it's about staying on top. And Jesus saw this struggle clearly. In Mark 10:43-44, He said, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. That flips everything upside down, doesn't it? You see, the world says greatness is about status, titles, and influence. But in the kingdom of God, true power is revealed in humility, in how we serve, how we treat those who have nothing to offer us in return. I've learned sometimes the strongest leaders are the ones who choose to listen instead of dominate, who kneel down when they could stand tall. So here's the question. Are you using your influence to build others up or to keep yourself in control? Because power isn't evil. But when it becomes the goal instead of the tool, it can quietly harden our hearts. True authority doesn't come from forcing submission. It comes from reflecting the heart of Jesus, the greatest servant of all. This one's tough, but we need to talk about it. In a world where temptation is just one click away, where casual relationships are glorified and purity is mocked, the battle for sexual integrity is real. And if we're honest, most of us have felt that struggle, whether it's a glance that lingers too long, a habit we can't quite break, or a relationship that's gone too far. But here's the truth, physical desires on their own aren't sinful. God created us with longing, with emotion, even with passion. But when those desires go unchecked, when we remove them from God's design, they start to control us. 1 Thessalonians 4:3-5 says it clearly, it is God's will that you should be sanctified, that you should avoid sexual immorality. Not in passionate lust like the pagans who do not know God. This isn't about shame, it's about freedom. Because sexual sin doesn't just affect our bodies, it wounds our spirit. It creates distance between us and the one who loves us most. And no amount of pleasure is worth that price. I've talked to so many people who chased physical gratification only to feel emptier than before. But I've also seen lives restored, hearts healed when they surrendered that area to God. So let me ask you, is your desire leading you toward holiness or away from it? Because God isn't trying to withhold something good from you. He's trying to give you something better. Let me leave you with this. Lust doesn't always show up loud and obvious. It's sneaky. It whispers. It weaves its way into our thoughts, our habits, our dreams, until one day we wake up and realize our heart has drifted far from the God we once loved so deeply. And that's why this conversation matters. Because lust isn't just about temptation, it's about direction. What are we really chasing? Where is our desire leading us? The Bible gives us a powerful solution in James chapter 4:7. Submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. That's not just a nice quote, that's a promise. We're not called to fight alone. God is ready to help. But we have to take the first step. That step starts with honesty, with naming the desires that have taken root in our lives, with surrendering them, not hiding, not justifying, but laying them down at the feet of Jesus. You can start today, right now. Ask God, Lord, show me what's pulling me away from you, and He will. Because His goal isn't to condemn, it's to restore. If this message spoke to something deep inside you, don't walk away unchanged. Subscribe to this channel. Light bears truth, and join us as we dive deeper into God's Word, one truth at a time. You're not alone on this journey. There's freedom on the other side of surrender.